to our major event of the day, and this is interactive panel, and you can see all our experts online, and our moderator James Taylor will take over. Okay, let's start.
All right. Welcome to the panel, everybody. I'm James Taylor. I'm going to be your host for today, which mostly means acting as the sort of master of ceremonies here. As many of you know, I've been in the business a really long time. I've worked with everybody on the panel in one way or another at different points, and I think you'll enjoy their perspectives on what we're going to talk about. So the way this is going to work, I'm going to do a quick intro of everybody, because that way I can make sure no one goes on and on about their own experience. So that keeps the introduction shorter. I have a couple of leading questions that I will ask them, and I'm going to ask them to restrict their answers to customer stories that are relevant to the question, again, to try and keep the whole thing focused. And then while they're answering those questions, what I would encourage you to do is type any questions you have into the chat. Yeah. There's a lot of, our experience with Teams meetings is that we really need everybody else to stay on mute without exception. Please mute yourself right now. Please do not unmute yourself to ask a question. Please just type it in the chat and let me ask the question, okay? Everything else tends to go very poorly on Teams. So please mute yourself, stay on mute, ask questions in the chat, but feel free to ask the questions whenever you like, and I will get to them. I reserve the right to rephrase them, combine them, or ignore them, depending on what I think of the question. So that, again, also tends to work. So with that, let me do a few introductions. So first of all, we have Arash. Arash is the creator of the decision-centric approach methodology for people, rules, data, and processes focused on business decisions as first-class objects. And since about 2008, Arash has been applying this approach and founded FlexRule to be the technology arm and muscle for implementing this approach around the world. So welcome, Arash. Been a while since I spoke to Arash. Alan has been in human factors, business rules, and decision management a really long time, and for reasons best known to himself, has a PhD in neural networks. He's been a consultant. He published Knowledge Automation, the sort of the fundamental book behind decision requirements diagrams, back in 2012. Is for his sins a co-chair of the DMN committee at OMG, and really, like me and a few others, has been involved in DMN since the very beginning. And he's currently really trying to help business users get access to decision management tools. Gary is another long-time collaborator. He's been working in business automation and architecture for 30 years or so. He works with Oracle as a business automation architect, doing research prototypes around next-gen cloud infrastructure and generative AI and stuff like that. He's been very heavily involved in DMN until very recently. He chaired the DMN committee and has provided lots of input to the DMN committee over the years. And DMN, for those of you, in case anyone's not been paying attention, is the decision model and notation standard. Guilhem is joining us from, I imagine, from somewhere pleasant in the south of France, and has been involved in decision technology for 20 years, like the rest of us. His focus right now is on knowledge modeling and the business user experience, really trying to make authoring decisions easier. He's the decision chief architect at IBM, involved in a number of interesting projects, and my favorite is the unmanned Mayflower autonomous ship, which I think is a fascinating project. Jan is joining us from the UK. He's been working in investment banking for 25 years or so, focused on decision automation, decision modeling, machine learning, and AI. Lots of projects that apply decision modeling and machine learning together. He's been one of the first to sort of apply large language models and decision modeling to sort of fact check things. And he's also the co-author of an absolutely fabulous book called Real World Decision Modeling with DMN. And he and I have just recently released a second edition of it. And he's co-chair of another organization called the DMN On-Ramp Committee, an organization focused on helping people adopt DMN. And then lastly, we're joined by Carlos. Carlos says he's extremely sick, so it's just as well we're all remote, so he can't infect anybody. If anybody does get sick afterwards, it was Carlos's fault. He's spent a long time in AI, analytics, decision management, business roles. I worked with him many years ago. And he's been working in this space since Neuron Data through Nexpert, Blaze Advisor, FICO, and now Sparkling Logic, which he co-founded, and he's responsible for Smarts, their decision management platform. So it's a great panel. Welcome all of you. Thank you very much for joining. Hopefully I didn't tell any outright lies about any of you. They're no worse than the typical PR bump that you get spit about you normally. So with that, I'm going to ask my first question. I've got a couple of questions here to keep the thing moving. I'll ask them. Put your questions in the chat if you have questions, and we'll go from there. So first question for the audience. Looking at your clients and the projects they're working on, how do you see generative AI changing how we build decision models, how we specify decision logic, or what we specify decision logic for? Does this going to eliminate the need to code certain things at all in decisioning platforms? Or is it just going to change the way we code things in decision platforms? And if you don't think it's going to make a change in the short term, do you think it will eventually? And I'd really like you to illustrate this with stories from clients or from projects, rather than just sort of like, your general opinion. So who wants to go first? Who's got a comment on Gen AI or an observation from a project on using Gen AI? Don't all speak at once. Hey, go on, Gary.
Sure. So first of all, I have to update you. My resume is a little bit out of date. We've been reorganized yet again. So now I work
I'm
for
shocked.
the Oracle Healthcare and AI division.
Okay.
And what we are doing is we're taking electronic health records. This big acquisition now, geez, I guess it's been over 2 years, of a Cerner, maybe more familiar to the Europeans. In the US, at least on the West Coast, it's more Epic.
Yeah.
But you can think of, they've got a lot of products. And so the key thing here is, for those of you who are as old as me, you may remember, of course, back 20 years ago, I didn't really go to the doctor because I was 20 years younger. But when I did, you would have a nice interaction, just sort of a little room, and you and the doctor, and they would, poke and prod on you and ask you some questions. And recently, you may have noticed that there's a computer in the way, right? And the doctor doesn't really look at you. He looks at his computer screen, and he seems to be really focused on the difficult task of data entry and searching through your chart and not missing anything, but certainly not ever looking at you or talking to you. So I don't know if your presence is even required at a physical anymore, but certainly the computer's is. So what we're trying to do is take AI and other tricks and modernize this experience, right? So you could imagine there's a chart, and it's got all the orders and medications and allergies and things that you have. There might be something in there, but it might be hundreds of pages, right? So if you could summarize that and bring to the front the relevant things for this particular patient encounter, that might be interesting. If you could just transcribe what happened, and put it into the chart so that the doctor didn't have to do it, that might be interesting. Anyway, that's my round sort of non-answer to your question.
So how do you see? I mean,
what I'm trying to do is we're all of Oracle really is focused on this idea of trying to modernize through LLMs, but not all LLMs, right? I mean, there's lots of other AI things. There's smart search, right?
But Gary, think about decisioning in this. Think about decisioning in this context. I mean, a classic use of decisioning in an electronic medical record is things like identifying drugs that interact with each other, or treatments that are not in fact recommended by the current standard of care for a particular patient, given those patient's characteristics. And those are typically coded into HL7 or into a decision engine in some way. Do you guys see using Gen AI to replace those current engines with a Gen AI based approach, or do you see it being changing the way you write that logic, or what?
Yeah, we want to save that, and that's actually interesting. Listening to Carol's talk, I mean, we've discovered lots and lots of different rule engines, in our Cerner acquisition. Goodness, there's Blaze, and there's TIBCO, and there's SQL, and there's 3 or 4 other ones.
Yes.
So we have to preserve these rules. And they're more important, I think, with the Gen AI, because maybe the LLM hallucinated and forgot to check to see if you're allergic to penicillin, right? And so we have these kind of mandatory checks really through business rules at key points in the interaction. So when the doctor goes to sign the order, which of course is all electronic now, it goes out to the Multum database and looks for drug interaction. It looks in the patient chart for allergies, and it checks a few other things, right? And it actually has to, legally interrupt the workflow, right? It has to pop up, something. So what's the equivalent of a pop-up, in a chat or in the new world? That's another thing that we're trying to work through.
Okay, so but you don't see a fundamental. Your experience with this so far is that this is going to refine rather than replace this kind of
exactly
explicit decision logic.
The business rules will continue to be important to serve as a check right, for the
Right.
newfangled technology.
Yeah, I
Can
mean,
can I jump
yeah,
in?
go ahead, Jen. Yeah.
I totally agree with Gary's characterization. I hope you don't mind if I characterize that as a cautious interpretation of the impact that LLMs will have. I certainly have the same. We've seen LLMs used inside decision models to structure input, to take complex things like an interactive user interview, to capture that and to make and to extract information from that. But what we found is that we get much better results when we keep what we're trying to do with LLMs very, very simple. So one step at a time. So, for example, simple document extraction is very powerful and quite reliable. And making any attempt at real world inference or knowledge is a very bad idea. LLMs can also be used to generate specific output summaries, whether it be proposed changes to an insurance policy, which is the commercial example I'm thinking of, or an explanation of the decision's outcome in a human readable form. But both of those are effective and fairly reliable. But let's not forget, LLMs have a huge number of other tasks which they're really good at that people tend to forget. I'm talking specifically about semantic search, about retrieval augmented generation approaches, and classification. They're still pretty good at that, and much more reliable than some of the more advanced applications and use cases that have been proposed for them.
Yes, I mean we've done some work as many of us on the panel have around how do you use large language models, or can you use them in the construction of a decision model? Because one of the other questions is, can I, if I'm turning a bunch of policy documents into a decision model, so I can embed it in a decision engine to get a reliable answer, even if I want to still have the explicit logic when I'm done, can I get there faster using an LLM? And to Jan's point, our experience so far has been that works well, if you like, once you know what the structure of the model looks like. You know, filling in the blanks is something you can teach an LLM to do fairly quickly. But our experience with client projects has been that trying to derive the structure of a decision model from those documents using an LLM is harder, at least in part because neither the legacy code nor the legacy documents contain the business intent that you're trying to capture with the decision model. So it's not that the LLM can't do it necessarily, I'm not sure it could, but the materials you can feed into it don't have the knowledge, right? So it's not there to extract. So I'm curious, has anybody else? And they're biggest. Anyone else on the panel been playing with? I know Gary presented last year on using LLMs and decision models.
We did.
Yeah.
So the way we did it, we use LLM to read the documents and create whatever the LLM trained for on that particular domain to extract the intent. But more often than that, that provides the context to the user from the chat perspective, and then ask the user to augment the understanding of the document and create a specification on how they want the decision appear. And that context generation from the document plus the extra information from the user, we capture the holistic context and intent of the user to the set of instruction to generate the decision model. And that's how we go about it.
Right. So the same kind of blend. So Carlos, you had your hand up too.
Yeah. So the feature out for a year. So we had some, some early feedback because this is all early. So I have one broad point and then some detailed one. So the broad point is these things are incredibly, incredibly useful. They say behind every great man, there's a very surprised woman.
Yeah.
There's a very surprised woman. I would say the same thing with respect to LLMs. I didn't believe that they would be so powerful when I started, but it's quite kind of surprising. So they get used a fair amount in order to get started quickly. So to your point, to everybody's point, you cannot be too sophisticated, but you will be surprised how sophisticated in the end you end up being if you're able to learn leverage the conversation capabilities of the tool. So the idea being, you get started, you say, you know, I want to do a decision or credit decisioning, give me a data model, give me a decision flow, or, you know, dependency diagram, depending on how you think about it, a decision model, and give me some rules. The system will actually start producing stuff. And then if you're able to keep up the conversation and to steer it the right way, you will end up with something that, at least to get started, is it's quite good and quite surprisingly good. We see it applied to things that are a little bit more graphical, like, you know, you saw in Caroline's presentation, there are forms in there and UIs to get started with UI, saying, you know, I want a UI that does that, you know, etc. These things are incredibly good at doing that. And who gets helped the most with that are the analysts, more than the programmers. The analysts can get quicker to a semi-formal or formal representation of what it is that they want. Right. The reality, though, is that just after that, that's where they stop, essentially. Once you get started, then when you reach a certain level of complexity, the generative AI can no longer cope with it. So if you end up with a flow, you know, where you have 20 steps and you decide, you ask the LLM, remove the one in the middle, it won't know what to do. I mean, it will do something, but, you know, good chance it's not what you want. So you have to be very explicit. And what we notice is that among the analysts, the ones that win are the English majors, you know, the PhDs. It's basically the people who can conduct a conversation the right way, way more than those who have a background purely in the technology. Now, we also, it also gets used for more mundane, I mean, not mundane, but more tasks which don't have an impact on things that end up being executed, like I want to understand my data, in particular decision-relevant data. I want to generate a report that does that kind of stuff. You know, report generation is not something that analysts, that kind of analysis or rules writers are familiar with. So this helps with that. And then finally, what we've seen is usage on this in, and I think Jan mentioned this, the obvious application, quote unquote, which is what generative AI is supposed to do, generating content, which is generating content for things that are end user facing. Like, here's a communication. I want you I want to tell this customer the reasons why the decision is like this. And by the way, the customer is mad. So, you know, be gentle about it. Or script for agents. You know, that kind of stuff.
Right.
But they're expensive and slow.
Yes,
that's the other. That's the big point.
Well, the other thing I noticed that there was an interesting survey recently. Someone said the same programming task was assigned to 3 different teams, and basically the ones whose Gen AI LLM infrastructure was the most sophisticated got done fastest and retained the least about the problem. So the other problem here, of course, is if you have analysts that you really want to understand the decision model when you're done, that's going to constrain your ability to use the LLMs beyond a certain level, right? Because you still want the analyst at the end of it to understand what the model says, right? Jan, sorry, you had an opinion.
No, I agree with you, and I think that there's some aspects. I may sound like a Luddite, but there are some aspects of building DRDs and decision tables manually which are beneficial, right? Because when people start doing that, when they interact with each other and start drawing those diagrams, they think and often criticize the way the company is currently doing things, which is advantageous. But I don't know. I think it was an American story recently. It was said that the police are using body cam footage and a generative AI to generate a draft arrest report straight from the video, which is then edited. And it's not too much of a leap in a few years, I think, to think of a meeting room in which people are meeting and discussing entities and decision making, and having a computer keep records, keep minutes, and start, you know, drawing a model and edit the model as people go.
Right. No, I think that's probably true. And Guilhem, I have a question for you. So we were talking to a customer of yours, and one of their interesting observations was that their interest in using LLMs in this context was much more around change requests. So I've got a project, I've got a decision project that's already running, got a decision model, I've got rules, it's all working, and I get a new document in that says, I need this change made. And they felt like that the LLM could be tremendously helpful in reading the document and then looking at the model and going, I think you need to change this table, and these are probably the rules you need to change, and take me to the right piece of the decision model. And I know you guys are doing some research. I mean, does that resonate with you it struck me as an interesting observation. Yeah.
It does. It's indeed a use case we're looking at, but it's probably not the first on our list. I think the use case that's the most common is get this big policy document and generate rules out of it, which is what Carlos was saying, bootstrap a project. Right. But I mean, here we're looking at the technical capability, and I like Carlos' answer, but it's a technical answer. It's what our products are able to do, right? There's another side of the coin that we need to not forget is what the customer want to do. And recently, I was talking to a bank, for example, and I wanted to introduce them to ML and to GenAI, two different topics, but still linked. And basically, their conclusion was, there's no way we're going to even touch it. Let other people get burned first. And when it's mature, in a few years, we'll have a look at it. That is, even though they understand the value, they see that we have the technology, that we have tools that start to be helpful now, they still don't want to get a chance to introduce rules that they have not read, understood fully, or could type by themselves into an app that is designed for compliance. Because the risk of a mishap and the cost of such mishap would be just so great. And this is also linked to what Jan was saying. There's value in manually typing decision tables or reviewing decision tables in that you know exactly what's in there. GenAI is probably a good bootstrap. It has some good advantages, but it's not yet mature to a point that the market, at least the compliance market, is fully ready to adopt it. There is a gap here between technology and the market.
And I think we're very far from the point. I mean, from the point where the outcome of an LLM is something that has the same power as the formal syntaxes or formal representations that we have. That's why we still have a mathematics language. There are ways of expressing things in math because we need the precision, we need the ability to reason on those things, which doing it on generic language is very difficult. So I really think we're very far with LLMs, and I don't even think that LLMs pretend that they do. I mean, we are the ones we're trying to push them.
We'll come to that. We'll come to that in a second. But
I think, James, I'd like to go back to the question you asked Guilhem, but about the use of this for changing models. And I've got a lot of sympathy there, and we're working towards this. So I agree with Denis' characterization. I think it was yesterday that we're seeing that LLMs give us a UX revolution rather than an AI revolution, and this allows a lot more types of users to be involved in shaping decision systems than just analysts. So yes, I'm sure GenAI will be useful in creating rule sets or helping to create them, but I think the big impact is going to be opening up the maintenance of existing decision systems to business users and end users, and finding ways for them to interact with the system by stimulating alternatives, coming up with new ideas and so on, so expressing the business motivation of the system, setting the KPIs. All of that is going to be very nicely mediated by natural language, I think.
Yeah, no, there was a great comment. I was at an event with the International Institute for Analytics, and they had a speaker there talking about large language models. And he said, very soon, he said, either you will have replaced your user interface with a large language model, or your customers will be using a large language model to talk to your user interface.
Yeah.
And I had a certain sympathy for this point of view, because I agree with you. I think this is, you think about the kinds of questions we try and enable customers to ask with decision engines. Go look at the data about how you made decisions in the past, identify ones that turned out to be bad decisions, look at the structure of the decision model so you can figure out which pieces you want to change, go find the rules in there, change them, run a simulation to see what the impact is. And you feel like I could articulate that in a relatively short speech, right? But at the moment, I have to teach someone how to go do every piece of that. And the idea that an LLM might just be able to let me say that and then go off and like do several things under the covers and then come back and say, okay, I run all that, I ran it through the simulation, and no, that won't work. Here's why, here's the KPI. I agree with you. I think that feels like a very compelling use case around a decision engine, but as several of the other points have been made, still leveraging the existence of a decision engine, right?
Yes.
Taking advantage of it.
Exploiting the generative aspect of Gen AI, which is what it's for, where you say, I need to increase this particular margin or ratio by a certain percentage. Suggest some ways I can do that. Gen AI can look at your entire decision model and process model and suggest things you could do, simulate them, and come up with the results.
And this user interface, not revolution, but change, I hope will have the side effect of reducing the role of professional IT consultants in decision management, because often they get in the way of business experts and SMEs and the model, which they then tend to regard as a technical asset.
Yeah.
Yes. Though speaking as a consultant, obviously, I would agree with you that this is a problem, right? I mean, the part of why we like decision models as an artifact, I think many of us, is precisely because they are they don't require that disintermediation the way some other technical models do, right? That you can express a very detailed definition of your system's behavior using a decision model and still have it be a business-facing artifact. Even though it is very detailed and very technical, and it has a great level of detail in it, and this makes it a very appealing artifact because it doesn't require IT interpretation. But yes, there is a lot of habit on a bunch of people to feel like once it's implemented, now I have to be the intermediary for it. And I think you're right that this change. So do people see other roles changing? There's a great question. In the chat, I will come back to Jacob's in a second because I think his is interesting too. But this idea that the output of an LLM requires interpretation, it requires interaction, that someone's got to look at it and make sure there aren't, metaphorically speaking, or to actually extra fingers in the photo, and interpret it and engage with it, as Arash was saying, as an assistant-y kind of thing, or in Gary's point, where there's still some explicit logic in here. Do we think this is a current problem that we expect to be resolved, or do we think this is a short-term problem that they'll get to, or is it inherent in LLMs? What's people's thinking about this as this need for, as a friend of mine likes to say, a human airbag in the middle of all of this, going to persist with LLMs, or LLMs going to get around it? Anyone got any signs of which way that's going to go from their work to date?
I think if you're expecting LLMs to be making decisions, then that problem will always be there, because essentially you're asking a question of the language base that you trained the LLM off, not of a number of experts you've prepared to trust, in particular the experts in your organization. So I don't see any way around that unless an organization has its own LLM specifically trained on its own business policy, and then you might as well have your own.
We need another architecture. We need another architecture to do that. LLM only Gen AI is never going to get there.
Correct.
But I think Alan made the key point here is that these things are trained on data, and the quality of the data is what's going to determine whether these things are capable of doing it or not. Formally, it sort of, with a human in the middle, sort of bypasses that. But look at any end, look at the management in that enterprise. I defy anybody to show me one that works. They don't. Data is around in the wikis and it gets stale, never gets replaced. So you cannot really, to train this thing, you have to do a ton of work. And actually, to the point, Guilhem was talking about customers saying, I won't touch this yet. When we've seen that, it's been not really much around the capabilities of LLM, but about the fact that they know that in order to get that thing working properly, they need to take care of their data. And they've been trying for 30 years, they haven't been able to.
Yeah. And sometimes it's interesting because sometimes many people, maybe outside of this panel, because we probably know a little bit details on the LLM, but many people think that the LLM hallucination, as it's the name has come across many different conversations, are kind of the defect to LLM. So by putting more data, more energy, we can rectify that. We forgot maybe, and it hasn't been communicated with many of the leaders of this area that they put product out. This hallucination defect is not actually a defect, it's byproduct of the architecture. So if we don't change the architecture the way that it has to be to not produce the hallucination, we can just resolve it by doing the RAG or by fine tuning. There are always edge cases. It's the byproduct of the architecture. There's nothing defective about it, whether we like it or not.
Right. Yes, it is. It's a feature, but not necessarily one we like. But it's not. But
Exactly.
It's not an error, right? No, right. I mean, there was some great illustrations of this. I was watching a guy give a presentation on it, and he was talking about how impressed he'd been with large language models. And I think he was Bosnian, and he was talking about asking all these questions about Bosnian soccer and Bosnian soccer teams, and it's giving him these great, really detailed answers about Bosnian soccer teams. And then he said, "Who am?" and then "Who is?" and he gave his own name. And they said, well, so-and-so is a Bosnian soccer player, and gave this whole like resume of this imaginary Bosnian soccer player. Because if you've asked all these questions about Bosnian soccer and then you ask about someone, the most likely thing is that he's a Bosnian soccer player. And if he's a Bosnian soccer player, then the most likely thing he's played for one of these teams and he's played with And so off it went down this rabbit hole of this completely made up thing, because it's just predicting what the most likely thing to say next is, right? So it makes them great conversationalists, but they they can get a little bit monomaniacal, right? So I mean, on this topic, I mean, I want to stay on this LLM thing for a second. So we got a question from Denise. So you see it in the chat. So he's arguing, he's asking if you guys think there's a real model of the world here, right? That can LLMs ever be expected to reason about the world, given that they don't really have a conceptual model of the world? They just have a language model. And whether you guys feel like that's is the technology going to be adaptable to solve that problem, or is this, as we were just saying, inherent in the large language models? And if we want to solve that problem, we're going to have to go around it somewhere.
But the answer to these things is not going to be LLMs by themselves. It's going to be LLM plus stuff.
Right.
So the guy from what's his name, Wolfram, had a book and a very long white paper where he basically addresses this issue. And it's true, LLMs do not have a conceptual world model, but Wolfram Alpha does. So he sees a big advantage in having a combination of those two, and I'm sure that there are some others there. So I think in the end, it's not going to be the large language model by itself. Now, can it through time, gain? We don't really understand how it gets to the result it gets. So can a large language model, when you get into the trillions of parameters, come up with the concepts based on what it is? Maybe, I don't know. But the foreseeable future is going to be combinations.
Yeah, and my guess is you're on the edge when you look at the prompt and you're pleading with the LLM to not do something, right? So, I looked at one of the early prompts for summarizing, a patient chart, and it wants it to summarize it as if you're a medical doctor, for a medical doctor's consumption, but it's saying, please don't diagnose or attempt to treat anything based on this. Just give me the summary.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, whatever you do, don't do any of these things.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. No, that is indicative. I mean, that brings up another interesting thread that was in our list of precursor questions. So I'll ask it now. So what technologies do we see as a natural set of complements here? We've certainly, as many of you have, done plenty of projects with rules or explicit logic in a decision model and machine learning in a decision model. And we've done plenty of projects where they're just rules, and we have others where there's machine learning models that feed other machine learning models that feed other machine learning models, and so on. So there's all these rules and machine learning combinations in decision models. Do we see AI as another potential node in those decision models, that a trained large language model to extract value or to do explanations might be part of that? Are there other technologies, optimization or other kinds of analytic technologies that we expect to see showing up inside a decision model? So rather than being used to build one, executing in the context of one? I'm curious what people are seeing in real projects, and where what ones are, what's getting combined with explicit logic now. What do they see coming soon?
So maybe I can try that. What we are seeing today is a decision model into which one of the node is a call out to an ML model, right?
Okay.
Predictive score, typically. It used to be that we used to say, go get your data first and then call your rule engine. And now we are seeing more and more people wanting to say, in the middle of my decision model, I want to call out to external services, including ML. For example, ML scores, right? Predictive scores are a good one, which is making sense because first you call onto it only if you need, so not necessarily right from the get-go before you invoke your rule engine, and you call it. You can blend it in such a way that it's not even visible that you're calling. You can write rules that are mixing elements from your data model that are hard-coded facts, like the amount of the loan, with elements that are retrieved from scores, such as the propensity of the customer to churn or things like that, that you can mix and match in the same sentence. So for the standpoint of the analyst, it's very natural. And since an ML model or predictive score model is actually a pure function, right? You call it with data, you get it exactly the same output all the time. As long as you have the proper governance in place between your rules on one side or your decision model on one side and your ML model on the other side, you can build a set that is a composed set of rules and ML that is versionable, that is testable, repeatable, etc., that is much more powerful than just rules alone or ML model alone that you call in sequence. So we're seeing that.
Yeah, I would agree that we see a number of those, and we're starting to see some opportunities for using large language models in that context to do things like extract features from text blocks and so on.
Absolutely.
So, Jan, I know you've done some work around mixing matching models and AI. So what have you seen in projects?
Well, having ML nodes directly in a decision is hugely powerful, along with LLMs. For the LLMs used in a way that I was talking about earlier on, as structuring input and doing getting unstructured input and basically extracting specific information from it, classification and semantic search. But the combination of machine learning and rules, and I'm going to say something a little controversial here before I go any further. In our experience, for most decision models that we come across, the highest, most reliable business value still comes from the integration of business rules with predictive models, not generative models. Now, this may change in future. I expect it will. But so far, classic machine learning hasn't gone away. And the combination is powerful because you can use DNM, for example, to represent ensembles and voting schemes. So you can have sets of machine learning models that are working on the same problem, and where in a particular case one has a foible or an issue, others can pick up the slack and therefore deliver collectively a much higher performance. And also you can use decision tables to cage machine learning models so that when they come across a discontinuity or a failure to extrapolate, you can swap them out dynamically for a simpler model or maybe even a decision table. So the combination is a powerful one. It also improves transparency, of course, as I outlined in my DecisionCAMP 18 presentation.
Right.
Yeah. So maybe, John, what you're suggesting in this context is kind of a consensus model between multiple different types of them. Rules, machine learning, purely traditional machine learning model for regression classification and LLM, and then another model on top of them, which aggregates the data and does the consensus and puts the output there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, if you can find an ML algorithm, that's going to be great because it's going to be probably more predictable. It's going to be, your electric bill is going to be a lot cheaper. I mean, so for example, we're using LLMs, but we're also using semantic search, right? Which is an ML kind of technique where you can scan not trillions of bits of information, but just millions, and you sort of can tell whether what's the, headache and cephalalalgia, I mean, who would know that those are the same thing, right? But it's, very important.
Well, you obviously, but yeah, it's like, yeah.
it's very important to, semantic search. I think, I mean, Google has this kind of spoiled, right? But, it's much, of course, LLMs can do that, but they're much more random and much more expensive to use.
And with that combination as well, you can support MLOps concerns. You can document your training sets. You can describe in a decision how you're doing feature engineering, one-hot encoding or discretization or something like that. And you can even check that a model, whether a model needs training or not, based on the changes in the distribution of the inputs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, John, you touched on a very important point. I mean, calling out a decision, analytics model. I mean, most tools have been able to do it for a long time, and the standard is able to do it a long time, and it's an established value. What we are seeing as a trend there is something we didn't expect, which is customers basically saying, well, at the end of the day, what I manage is a decision, not a bunch of models. So again, to James' point, what central is the decision. The model is just one of the ways I get information to make the decision. But what I want is all that to be managed in a coordinated way. If I'm going to go and do a champion challenge, if I'm going to do a, any kind of canary deployment, that kind of stuff, I need to be able to do that in a coordinated way. And the pressure has been more on now that everybody can call out and it's become a trend and a normal way of dealing with analytics, with machine learning and AI. It's now manage them all together. Essentially, I want model ops. Essentially, what you call what you mentioned as model ops.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely. Yeah. So that we've cracked, I think, how to combine the use of rules and machine learning and mathematical calculation in a decision service, and the DMN handles that very nicely. So that's about making a single decision. The interesting work is around the environment of that decision in the business, where you want to look at, as you say, model ops. You want to look at the ongoing development of those models and those rules over time using simulation or optimization, and managing all those techniques and being sure that people are using them conveniently. It is the issue. So
in addition to just executing and managing in terms of deploying, and one question that comes back is, well, you made me build this huge decision, or you helped me build this huge decision. I have all these models, all these rules. How do I know my decision? Or how do I know, if I have compliance issues or fairness issues I need to take care of, or how do I know what actually contributes the most to my decision? I have 60 models and 1,000 rules, or 2,000 rules. How do I deal with this? So there is interest from our larger customers who have the most mature implementations to explore that kind of space. Which is again around decision analytics more than around decision management per se, though one is this idea.
Right. But a question for everybody then: has anyone seen? I know this. We've always had this as a theoretical possibility, where you can basically build an automated decision that looks at the results of another automated decision and automatically decides that it should change the way it makes the first decision. And we've certainly seen customers with manual processes for that feedback loop. Do we see many examples of that being automated? And do we think that's going to change with large language models and machine learning moving forward? Do you think that's going to make that more likely, or is it just going to be a choice that people make?
We have one customer who's doing it, but it's in the fraud space. So you can get
fraud.
away with you can get away with a lot in fraud. Yes. Essentially, what they do is they generate every night. They basically keep looking at the results, the rolling window of results of their decisions, and whatever gets flagged, and they basically build models and build rules actually, for flash fraud type of stuff as well as for long trend, and they put them in production in a canary mode, and then in a champion challenger mode, and then finally in a normal mode. So, but it's going to, without a human in the middle, it's going to be restricted to situations where you can get away with it, at least in the short term.
Right. Yeah, in fraud, they don't generally care how you catch fraud as long as you catch it. Right. Regulators are not typically.
And as long as you
fast,
catch enough of them and don't piss too many people off, that's.
Yeah, the question will be, of course, if you look at like Quebec has this new Law 11, and Law 11 says if you make a decision about a customer in an automated way and it has an impact on that customer, you have to be able to explain it. So in theory, if you turned down a credit card transaction because you were afraid of fraud and they couldn't buy something and they missed a price or missed a deal, you've had an impact on them with a completely automated decision. You might, in fact, under Law 11, be required to explain why that was your fraud decision. And there will be, that may change this calculation around fraud being something where no one really cares how you make the fraud decision, because if those laws start to replicate, they may start to say, well, any automated decision that you make that affects a customer has to be explainable. And that's going to put the cat among the pigeons in a fairly major way, I think. So, so we have a couple of other threads I want to get to, but while we're still on this last LLM question for everybody, Alan made the interesting point, and I think some of you others did too, around using LLMs to interact differently with the models. Project forward. Imagine we all start using LLMs in our UIs, and we do the kinds of things we're talking about. How is that going to change the organizational structure of organizations that are doing decision automation? Does anyone started to see interesting new roles or new team structures coming out of some of this technology, or are clients starting to rethink how they assign roles based on this stuff, or is it still too early?
I think it's
well, the whole
yeah.
Go on.
Go ahead.
So the whole concept of the decision intelligence and doing this new, relatively new in terms of technology, that when you go to organization, there is a I don't want to call it bias, but they want to do the things the way they do it already. So introducing the change in their current workflow is always a challenge. If I'm doing something that I'm used to do it for last 5, 10, 20 years, I'm a little bit hesitant to test the new things, not because I don't trust the new things, because it changes the way I do the things that I used to do it. Now, right. I guess with that context, what we understood is you don't necessarily want that everyone changes the way they do things. You want to make it easier for them to do that. So that's where the LLM comes into the picture. However, with the limitation that we see, we establish something called a team called Decision Ops. And the intent of having this Decision Ops team is not like DevOps to deploy things and manage it and monitor it. It's actually the whole full cycle. So with these new technologies getting easier, I think that part of Decision Ops will be more relevant to get the things done and then train the team that they do the job with that new technologies that make it easier. So essentially, people don't like to do that change in the first place unless the change is done for them.
Right. No, I also like Denis's suggestion that the companies will have a shiny new thing officer. I thought that was yeah.
There is one thing we noticed, and I think I tried to say it before, but I probably didn't say it right, is that we see a change in the type of analyst. I mean, the ones that are successful carry on a conversation in English, and not the ones who can draw diagrams. And we saw in an organization, the guy in charge was basically giving two feedback. I mean, the first one was, well, I'm going to have to hire more English majors and PhDs from this point on. And the second point was, this is awful. It's going to allow my product managers to start doing what the analysts are supposed to do, and the analysts are going to start doing what the programmers are supposed to do. So I think there is a lot of concern, let me put that way, on how this is going to change things.
Yes.
But it's certainly going to change it. And I really think that the analysts are going to be the ones that are impacted the most, what we call business analysts, or the people who build requirements, if you want, technical requirements or implementation requirements.
Yeah. I think
and you think of that as a worry, do you, Carlos?
Sorry?
You think of that as you have a worry about that?
No, I don't worry at all. I mean, it's just going to change. I'm not an analyst, so I'm very.
Yeah. Right,
it seems
right.
to me.
How do you think the role will change?
Enabling more natural relationships between humans and AI will enable more natural relationships between humans and other humans, and people will be able to perform their roles in a more natural and sensible way through the systems which they communicate through. So
you don't see a difference in role, just the interaction between them.
yeah, I think like business stakeholders will be able to state their objectives for the system directly, rather than writing them in a document and sending it to a development team that writes huge, ridiculous specifications and builds something
So
through.
But I think the problem
we're punching through many layers, getting things done more quickly, and
I
hopefully
think
revealing all the contradictions in their business objectives.
That's the point. I think that was one of the feedbacks. Is the problem is that the LLMs don't question. They don't come back and say, "You really mean this?" They don't really question back, and that's an important part of the role.
I mean, some business analysts don't either, but yes, but point taken, right?
That's the point.
This is an interesting one. I mean, I think I'm taken back many years ago. I remember talking to a guy who was implementing rules, and he described a situation. He said he came in one day, and this was a success story, mind you. And he said, I came in, and one of my architects, one of my tech people, is sitting in front of the screen with one of my business users, SMEs, and they're arguing about the rules. And I thought this was great. And we were like, well, this is a bit odd. Normally, you can get business users and architects to argue just by locking them in a room together, right? It's not typically very difficult. But he laughed and he said, well, that's true. He said, but in this case, they weren't arguing. They were just arguing about whether the rules were correct or not. And they brought different perspectives. The IT guy had one perspective around the data and the structure and everything else, and the business person had the SME perspective, but they were able to look at the rules and both argue about whether the rules are correct and not have to worry about the rest of it. There was no impedance between how one person saw it and how the other person saw it. And I think that's always been a strength of business rules, and it's certainly a strength of decision models. And I think what I'm hearing you guys say is that you see some of these LM technologies will take that to the next level. They will continue to remove the impedance between the different roles who care, the business owner, the business SME, the business analyst, and the programmer, so that their interactions can be more, we all bring a slightly different perspective, but we all see this, we all interacting with the same artifacts, and that will get stronger rather than necessarily eliminating the need for any of them to be in the picture. Is that a fair statement?
That's how I see it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, we have a few more minutes here. I want to ask, take a slightly different tangent. There's two perspectives on decision intelligence out there in the wild at the moment. One is that decision intelligence is this very human-oriented thing, and it's all about human decisions and how humans think about decisions, human. And another perspective, which is that decision intelligence includes and subsumes decision automation and decision support into a broader framework. And you see a lot of decisioning platforms adding decision intelligence capabilities and talking about it, and they mean more of the kind of stuff we would have always talked about in terms of machine learning and AI being added to rules and other kinds of decisioning. And there are other people out there very much talking about, different kinds of analysis for one-off kinds of decisions. And I'm curious how you guys see this being resolved, or if any of you see these as not being really too different, or if anyone has any sort of thoughts on this sort of emerging decision intelligence market and its relative to decision automation. Really, no one has any comments on decision intelligence.
I don't really.
A term.
Go ahead, Alan.
Do we really want to argue about marketing terminology?
I'm with you exactly.
Well, no.
Yes, because it drives the budgets in our clients.
No.
Yes, we absolutely have to argue about it.
It depends what you mean. It really depends on what you mean by decision analytics. If you mean by decision analytics that lets me understand the quality of my decision and track its quality through time, get alerts about the quality of my decision, absolutely we need that. And that's number one. That's the number one thing. And when we talk to customers, we tell them, don't write rules. Tell me first what you want to measure, and then we'll talk, or then we'll start talking about what the rules are supposed to be, etc., etc. You want to know what the business outcome is, and the only way to know what the business outcome is to know how to measure it. So that, I think, it's absolutely central to the success of decision management.
Right.
Now, as a marketing term to cover the decision execution, I know why. It's a feature. I mean, as far as
well,
I'm concerned.
but there's these two perspectives, right? Decision intelligence as a sort of decision engineering, decision automation, a sort of perspective on, or what we would all talk about. But there's this other group of folks out there talking about decision intelligence as essentially the next step in BI, in business intelligence, right? This is about context and about explicitly modeling decisions and thinking about decisions and decision impacts as part of your BI thing, right? So this is very much about, pulling things together to help a decision maker, but
they are
still
not the same
assuming that there's a
decisions.
decision maker to be helped. I realize that, but I'm just saying that there's these two perspectives, and I was just curious if anybody
But
else,
James,
saw them as problematic. Go ahead,
yeah, they
Guilhem.
are not the same decisions. The first one you talk about,
For sure.
what Carlos was talking about as well, which is improving the quality of the decision. We're talking operational decisions, decisions that an automated system is taking 1 million times a day. Whereas the second kind of decision that you're talking about is more one-off, right? It's business intelligence. I'm getting all of this data. Am I going to buy this company or not? Am I going to vote for this guy or that guy? This kind of decision that you take very infrequently, but require to be informed by lots of data to take the right decision. So they are not really operational decisions. They are more strategic decisions or human-driven decisions.
No, for sure, right? And but I think it's an interesting challenge for us as those focused on decision automation, right? Precisely because the D word covers this range of decisions. And
Agreed.
so you have people talking about machine learning and AI and decision models and so on in the context of decision intelligence for business decisions. Well, we're talking about all those same things in the context of decision automation. So I do think we as an industry are going to have to come to some kind of resolution over these things, because I think the BI and analytics, soft analytics people are definitely trying to bring a decision focus to their perspective. And it's going to overlap with the way we talk about decisions. So anyway, we only have a few minutes left. And I thought Jacob asked a question earlier that I thought would be a really good final thoughts question. So OpenAI 01 preview claims that it has reasoning capabilities, and I quote, which will no longer need symbolic AI to make good decisions, unquote. So opinions for everybody, and we'll do this in alphabetical order. So we'll start with Alan, Arash, Gary, Guilhem, Jan. Oh, Carlos is in the T's, so he comes after the A's and before the G's. And I'm curious, do you believe them? Do you think that the OpenAI has a large language model, or will soon have a large language model that really doesn't need symbolic reasoning, or do you think this is a crock of shit? Sorry, didn't mean to say that out loud.
Okay.
Alan, you get to go first.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I think it is possible in principle that LLMs will be able to implement logically sound symbolic AI reasoning.
Okay.
But that's like asking an LLM to add 1 and 1. What really is the point of that? We've already got.
What would be the point?
We've got really efficient systems for doing this already.
Okay. All right. So your point of view is yes, but who cares?
Yeah.
All right, Arash, what would you say?
I think yes, possible, but the problem is not whether it's possible or not, because they can generate anything that sounds very smart. The problem is, do we trust that sounded smart things that they generate? I don't think I do.
Okay, so why would we bother? And if we did bother, why would we trust it? All right, Carlos, what's your 2 cents?
Well, I say one day maybe. 01 preview, no.
No. Okay.
but I do think the trust question that Arash mentioned is significant. As long as we cannot explain, it's going to be difficult to use
for everything. Yeah. Okay, Gary.
Yeah, I haven't investigated this new capability. I would like to learn more about it before I, make permanent thoughts about it. But I'm guessing that it could work, in several different ways. I mean, I was really impressed, from about a year ago now with the Python programming capabilities, right? But it doesn't, just sort of spit out a Python program and then look at it and then tell you, what it means, right? By sort of, predicting the next token in the result of the Python program's execution. Rather, it has an actual Python interpreter, and it knows how to feed the Python that it generated to it, and it furthermore knows how to look at the error codes that come back, including syntax errors even, right? And it can even try to fix them, and sometimes it's successful. So I could imagine that if it were generating horn clauses or something like that, that it could actually run them through some kind of simple Prolog or other kind of rule engine, and then see if it seems to be valid or not, right? Even throw some test cases at it. So if it does a kind of an engineering approach, it might actually be something interesting.
All right, Guilhem?
Yeah, I see LLM improving on that front, but not necessarily in a place where they don't need symbolic AI, right? They can make good enough decision, for example, which is maybe perfectly sufficient for product recommendation or these kind of things, but make precise, explainable decision without symbolic AI. I mean, if by just learning from a body of text there could be no ambiguity, we would have no lawyers and no trials, right? So I think we still need the symbolic side, at least for some use cases such as compliance, legal compliance, and eligibility, etc.
All right. And Jan, you get to have the last word. Well, you're not, because I'll say something afterwards, but nearly the last word.
No pressure then. So let me be honest, I'm a little skeptical. I haven't tried to use it. But bear in mind, OpenAI is a company that is desperately trying to make a profit and not really succeeding. And so I think it's clearly bet a lot on this. I would not use it for life critical applications. Of course, I will play with it, but I want to end by saying, let's conjecture that they have solved that problem. And so it implies that there's a distant but maybe inevitable point at which we may no longer as humans be able to comprehend some of the reasoning being done in very specific domains. So like medicine, for example, which is already partially true today, but will get worse. So that the question is, what then?
Yeah, yes. That remains an interesting philosophical debate we have to have, I think. Well, we're out of time. I'd like to thank Arash, Alan, Guilhem, Gary, Jan, Carlos. Thank you all very much for your time. This was fun. I hope everybody enjoyed it in the audience. And I'll hand you back to Jacob. Jacob, back to you.
Okay. Thank you very much, all panelists and James. As usual, it was really good. And hopefully next year it would be more surprises. What your expectations today and what we will see. Okay, good luck.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Take care.
We're really on the West Coast for cocktail hour, unfortunately.
Me too.